I walked into my childhood home expecting Sunday dinner and cake to celebrate Hannah's new house. Instead, my parents ambushed me with a stack of mortgage documents demanding I take over $520,000 in loan payments. They announced they'd been telling relatives for months that I already agreed to this arrangement. My sister lounged smugly at the dining table, keys to her dream home dangling from her manicured fingers, while her 3 children played in the backyard. When shock rendered me speechless, Dad slammed his fist down, threatening legal consequences for breaking our supposed verbal contract. The betrayal sliced through my heart like broken glass. The familiar scent of Mom's pot roast filled the air, but my stomach churned with disbelief instead of hunger. Hannah's designer purse sat prominently on the counter, a stark contrast to the secondhand furniture I'd grown up with in this same kitchen. The mortgage papers spread across the table like evidence of a crime I never committed, each page stamped with official seals and my parents' signatures alongside spaces marked for mine. "Eliza, sweetheart, you've been saving money for years," Mom said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's time you helped family instead of hoarding your success." Her words carried the same manipulative tone she'd used throughout my childhood whenever she wanted something from me. Dad adjusted his reading glasses, pointing to specific clauses in the contract with his weathered finger. "We've already told everyone at church about your generous offer. Pastor Williams praised your family loyalty during last Sunday's sermon. You wouldn't want to make us look like liars, would you?" Hannah stretched lazily in her chair, examining her freshly painted nails with theatrical indifference. "The kids love their new bedrooms. Little Sophie keeps asking when Aunt Eliza is coming to see her princess room." Her smile held no warmth, only calculated cruelty. My throat tightened as I processed the magnitude of their deception. They'd orchestrated this entire scenario using my love for Hannah's children as emotional leverage, while simultaneously trapping me in a web of family expectations and social pressure. "I never agreed to any of this." I whispered, my voice barely audible above the kitchen clock's persistent ticking. Dad's expression hardened, transforming from fatherly concern to cold determination. "We have witnesses, Eliza. Your cousin Robert heard you discussing it at Christmas. Aunt Margaret remembers you mentioning how successful your career has become and how you wanted to give back to family." The room spun around me as I realized the depth of their planning. Every family gathering, every casual conversation about my job, every proud moment they'd claimed to share in my achievements had been reconnaissance for this moment. They'd weaponized my success against me, turning my hard work into an obligation I never accepted. Hannah's youngest daughter ran inside, chocolate ice cream smeared across her cheeks, and wrapped her tiny arms around my legs. "Aunt Eliza, Mommy says you bought us a house. Thank you, thank you." Her innocent joy cut deeper than any accusation my parents could make. I gently extracted myself from her embrace, my hands trembling as I backed toward the door. The walls of my childhood home felt like they were closing in, suffocating me with the weight of unspoken expectations and manufactured guilt. "I need time to think," I managed, grabbing my purse from the entrance table. "Time to think about honoring your commitments," Dad called after me, his voice echoing through the hallway. "We'll be contacting our attorney tomorrow morning. Family or not, a promise is a promise." The front door slammed behind me with finality, the sound reverberating through my chest like a gunshot. I sat in my car for 20 minutes staring at the house where I'd grown up, wondering how the people who raised me had become strangers capable of such calculated betrayal. Driving home through the familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood memories flooded back with painful clarity. I'd always been the responsible daughter, working 3 part-time jobs during high school, while Hannah partied and dated. When college acceptance letters arrived, I celebrated alone in my bedroom, while our parents fretted over Hannah's failed applications and mounting credit card debt. Throughout my undergraduate years studying finance, I lived on ramen noodles and wore the same 3 outfits to class, determined to graduate debt-free through scholarships and relentless work ethic. Hannah, meanwhile, dropped out of community college twice each time, claiming the coursework was too stressful for her creative spirit. The pattern continued through my 20s. While I climbed the corporate ladder at Morrison Financial Group, earning my certified financial analyst credentials and building an impressive portfolio, Hannah accumulated 3 children with different fathers and a lifestyle funded entirely by our parents' credit cards. But now, sitting in my apartment reviewing old family photos, I noticed something sinister I'd previously dismissed as parental concern. Every time I'd received a promotion or salary increase, our parents would casually ask detailed questions about my finances. They'd praised my incredible responsibility, while simultaneously emphasizing Hannah's struggles and need for family support. Last year's Christmas dinner conversation replayed in my mind with chilling clarity. Dad had specifically asked about my new senior analyst position and the accompanying raise to $95,000 annually. He'd seemed unusually interested in my savings account balance and investment portfolio performance. Mom had steered the conversation toward Hannah's housing difficulties, mentioning how rental prices kept increasing and how stable homeownership would benefit the children's education. She'd painted vivid pictures of little Sophie struggling to concentrate on homework in their cramped apartment while neighbors played loud music late into the night. I'd felt genuine sympathy for my sister's situation, even offering to help with a security deposit for a better rental. But that gesture had been twisted into something much larger and more permanent than I'd ever intended. The phone rang, interrupting my analysis. Hannah's name appeared on the caller ID, and against my better judgment, I answered. "Eliza, thank God," she said, her voice trembling with artificial vulnerability. "I've been crying all evening. I can't believe you'd abandon us like this, after everything we've been through together." "Hannah, I never agreed to pay your mortgage. I don't understand how Mom and Dad could claim otherwise." "But you did agree. You said families should support each other. You promised you'd help me get stable housing for the kids. Don't you remember our conversation at Easter?" My mind raced through that dinner months ago. I'd mentioned wanting to help family when possible, speaking generally about the importance of supporting each other through difficult times. Somehow, my generic expressions of familial love had been transformed into specific financial commitments I'd never made. That's not the same as agreeing to take on a $520,000 mortgage, Hannah. That's a 30-year commitment. "You make more money than anyone in our family," she countered, her voice shifting from pleading to accusatory. "You live in that fancy apartment, drive a new car, and go on expensive vacations. Meanwhile, my children are sharing bedrooms and eating generic cereal because that's all I can afford." The guilt manipulation felt as familiar as breathing. Throughout our childhood, Hannah had perfected the art of making others responsible for her happiness while avoiding accountability for her choices. Our parents had always enabled this dynamic, praising her free spirit, while expecting me to be the practical, reliable daughter who cleaned up everyone else's messes. I work 60-hour weeks to afford my lifestyle, Hannah. I've made sacrifices and careful financial decisions for over a decade to build my career and savings. That doesn't make me responsible for supporting your family. "So, you're saying my children don't deserve a stable home. You're saying their education and well-being matter less than your precious savings account." The conversation continued in circles for another 20 minutes, with Hannah alternating between tearful pleas and angry accusations. She claimed everyone at her new job knew about her generous sister helping with the house purchase. She described how the children had already started attending their new school district and made friends in the neighborhood. When I finally hung up, I realized the full scope of their manipulation. They hadn't just planned this financial trap. They'd created a social and emotional web that made saying no seem impossible. My refusal wouldn't just affect Hannah's housing situation, it would disrupt her children's education, disappoint family members who believed I'd made a commitment, and paint me as the selfish sister who had everything but shared nothing. But underneath the guilt and confusion, anger began to simmer. I'd worked too hard and sacrificed too much to have my financial security undermined by family members who refused to take responsibility for their own choices. If they wanted a legal battle, I'd give them one. Monday morning found me in the law offices of Brennan Walsh and Associates, clutching a folder filled with every document my parents had thrust at me. Attorney Patricia Brennan, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled into a professional bun, reviewed the papers with growing concern etched across her weathered face. "This is more complex than a simple family dispute," Patricia said, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses as she examined the mortgage documents. "Someone has been very busy creating what appears to be a substantial paper trail." She spread the documents across her mahogany desk like a detective organizing evidence. Bank statements showed wire transfers I'd never authorized. Email printouts displayed conversations I'd never had complete with my name, and what looked like my email address discussing mortgage obligations and family support agreements. "These emails supposedly from your account detail specific arrangements for you to assume mortgage responsibility." Patricia continued, pointing to highlighted sections. "The problem is the metadata shows they were created from an IP address that doesn't match your home or office internet service." My stomach dropped as I recognized the technological sophistication behind my family's deception. They hadn't just verbally claimed I'd agreed to their scheme, they'd manufactured digital evidence to support their lies. Patricia pulled out a magnifying glass and examined signature lines on various documents. "Tell me, Eliza, do you remember signing any birthday cards or graduation papers during childhood? Perhaps Christmas cards or thank you notes to relatives?" "Of course, hundreds of them over the years. My parents always insisted on handwritten thank you notes for every gift and holiday card to every relative." Her expression darkened. "I suspect those childhood signatures were practice material. Look at these mortgage application signatures." She showed me 3 different documents bearing my name in slightly varying handwriting styles, each one a closer approximation to my actual signature. The realization hit like a physical blow. My parents had been planning this betrayal for years, collecting samples of my handwriting and practicing forgery with methodical precision. Every family tradition, every insistence on proper manners and handwritten correspondence had been part of a long-term strategy to gain access to my financial identity. The forged signatures alone constitute multiple felonies, Patricia explained. But the manufactured email trail and false banking documents elevate this to federal fraud charges. Your parents have unknowingly documented their own criminal conspiracy. She opened her laptop and showed me public record searches, revealing the timeline of Hannah's house purchase. The mortgage application had been submitted 4 months ago, long before my parents claimed to have discussed the arrangement with me. The down payment came from a loan taken against their own heavily mortgaged house, suggesting they'd been planning to transfer the financial burden to me from the very beginning. "Here's what concerns me most," Patricia said, pulling up another screen. "These emails include details about your employment salary and personal banking information that could only come from identity theft or unauthorized access to your financial accounts." She recommended immediately freezing my credit reports and contacting my bank to review account security. The possibility that my parents had gained access to my personal financial information without permission added another layer of violation to their betrayal. "Can we prove the emails are fake?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Absolutely. Email forensics will show they were created retroactively and never actually transmitted through legitimate servers. The timestamps have been manually altered, and the IP address traces back to a computer in your parents' neighborhood." Patricia outlined our legal strategy with military precision. We'd file criminal fraud charges with the district attorney while simultaneously pursuing civil litigation for damages. The federal charges would include identity theft, wire fraud, mortgage fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. "But here's what worries me about going to trial," she admitted. "Your family has created a narrative where you appear to be the villain. They've convinced relatives, neighbors, and possibly your sister's children that you made and broke a promise. Even when we prove the documents are fraudulent, the emotional manipulation and social pressure could influence a jury's perception. I left Patricia's office with a clear action plan but a heavy heart. The legal system could address the criminal aspects of my family's behavior, but it couldn't repair the broken trust or heal the emotional wounds they'd inflicted. My parents had weaponized my love for family against me, and even victory in court wouldn't restore the relationships they'd destroyed. The drive home took me past my old elementary school where I'd first learned about honesty and integrity from teachers who stressed the importance of keeping promises and telling the truth. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents, who'd taught me those values, had abandoned them completely in their quest to manipulate my financial success for Hannah's benefit. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing bank statements and credit reports, searching for any other signs of unauthorized access or identity theft. The violation felt deeply personal, as if my parents had ransacked my home and stolen my most precious possessions. They'd taken my trust, my financial security, and my faith in family bonds, leaving behind only legal documents and broken promises. The first hint of how deeply the manipulation extended came at my cousin Rachel's wedding the following Saturday. I debated attending, knowing my parents would be there, but Rachel and I had been close since childhood, and I couldn't bear disappointing her on her special day. The moment I entered the reception hall, the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Aunt Margaret, who'd always been like a second mother to me, turned away when I approached her table. Uncle Robert, usually the jovial family comedian, gave me a look of such disappointment that I felt physically ill. My grandmother, seated at the family table in her best navy dress and pearls, beckoned me over with a crooked finger. At 87, she still commanded respect from everyone in our extended family, and her disapproval carried generational weight. "Eliza Catherine, sit down right this minute," she said, using my full name the way she had when I was 7 and had broken her favorite vase. "I need to understand what's gotten into you, child." I took the seat beside her, acutely aware that conversations at nearby tables had quieted as relatives strained to overhear our discussion. Grandma rose. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about Hannah's house situation," I began carefully. "Misunderstanding?" Her voice rose sharply. "Child, your parents told us all about your generous promise to help your sister get stable housing for those precious babies. And now you're backing out because you've gotten too big for your britches with that fancy job of yours." Cousin Sarah, Rachel's sister, leaned over from the adjacent chair. Eliza Hannah showed us pictures of the children's bedrooms. Little Sophie has been telling everyone at school about how her successful aunt bought them a beautiful house. How can you take that away from them now? The weight of their collective disappointment pressed down on me like a physical force. Every relative I'd grown up loving and respecting had been fed a carefully constructed narrative that cast me as the villain in Hannah's struggle for stability. Uncle David, normally reserved and diplomatic, joined the conversation with unusual intensity. "Your parents raised you to understand family loyalty, Eliza. Your sister has had a difficult time working minimum wage jobs and trying to provide for 3 children without reliable support from their fathers. When family members achieve success, we share that blessing with those who need help." I glanced around the reception hall, noting how my parents sat at a distant table, watching the confrontation unfold with satisfied expressions. They'd orchestrated this public shaming as carefully as they'd forged the legal documents, using my love for extended family as another weapon against my resistance. "I never promised to pay Hannah's mortgage," I said quietly, trying to maintain dignity while defending myself against accusations from people I'd loved my entire life. Aunt Patricia, a retired school principal with steel in her backbone, stood up from her chair and addressed me with the authority she'd once used to discipline unruly students. "Young lady, I was present when your mother shared your generous offer during Easter dinner at your parents' house. Don't try to rewrite history just because you're having second thoughts about helping family." The conversation I remembered from Easter involved general expressions of wanting to support family members when possible. Somehow that vague sentiment had been transformed into specific financial commitments and shared with relatives as established fact. "Your grandfather would be rolling over in his grave." Grandma Rose said, her voice thick with emotion. He worked 3 jobs during the Depression to keep this family together, and he taught us that success means nothing if you don't lift up the people you love. Hannah appeared at our table as if summoned by invisible signals, her eyes red-rimmed and her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. She wore a simple black dress that emphasized her financial struggles while highlighting her natural beauty, a calculated choice that made me appear wealthy and heartless by comparison. "I'm trying to give my children the stable home I never had growing up," she said, addressing the table but speaking loudly enough for nearby guests to overhear. "Eliza knows how hard I've worked to turn my life around. I thought family meant we supported each other through difficult times." Little Sophie, dressed in her flower girl outfit, ran up to Hannah and tugged on her dress. "Mommy, when are we moving into our big house? You promised we could paint my room pink." The manipulation reached peak effectiveness as my 6-year-old niece unknowingly became a prop in my family's campaign to coerce my financial compliance. Every adult at the table looked at me as if I were personally responsible for disappointing an innocent child. Cousin Robert, who'd driven 4 hours to attend the wedding, leaned across the table with genuine concern in his voice. "Eliza, I co-signed a car loan for Hannah 3 years ago when she needed reliable transportation for work. It was challenging financially, but family steps up when family needs help. I don't understand why you'd make such a generous promise and then change your mind." The revelation hit me like cold water. Robert's financial assistance to Hannah hadn't been a one-time favor. It had been part of a pattern where my parents identified successful family members and manipulated them into supporting Hannah's lifestyle. I was just the latest target in a long-term strategy. "How much was the car loan?" I asked, dreading the answer. $28,000, he replied, but it was worth it to help Hannah get back on her feet after her second divorce. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. My parents had been systematically approaching financially stable family members, manufacturing crises and obligations that resulted in monetary support for Hannah. The mortgage scheme wasn't their first attempt at financial manipulation. It was simply the most ambitious. I excused myself from the table, claiming I needed fresh air, but really needing space to process the magnitude of my family's deception. Outside the reception hall, I sat on a stone bench overlooking the gardens, where Rachel and her new husband had exchanged vows hours earlier, surrounded by the same family members who now viewed me as selfish and untrustworthy. The irony was devastating. I'd worked harder than anyone in our family to achieve financial success, motivated partly by the desire to help loved ones when opportunities arose. But my success had made me a target for manipulation rather than a source of genuine family support. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rachel. "Everything okay? You looked upset at Grandma's table." I typed and deleted several responses before settling on family stuff. "Don't worry about it on your wedding day. You look beautiful." But inside, I knew that my relationship with my extended family might never recover from my parents' calculated campaign of lies and emotional manipulation. They'd poisoned every connection I treasured, turning my success into a weapon against my own happiness. Tuesday morning started like any other day at Morrison Financial Group until my supervisor director, Jennifer Stevens, called me into her corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown. The serious expression on her usually warm face immediately set my nerves on edge. "Eliza, please close the door and have a seat," she said, gesturing toward the leather chairs arranged around her conference table. "We need to discuss some concerning information that came to our attention over the weekend." My stomach dropped as she opened a manila folder containing what appeared to be printed emails and handwritten notes. The company's human resources director, Michael Chen, entered the office carrying his own stack of documents, his expression professionally neutral but unmistakably troubled. "We received several phone calls yesterday from individuals claiming to be concerned family members." Jennifer began consulting her notes. "They suggested you might be involved in financial irregularities or experiencing personal problems that could affect your professional judgment." The blood drained from my face as I realized my parents had escalated their manipulation campaign to include my workplace. Morrison Financial Group managed investment portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and any suggestion of employee financial instability could destroy careers overnight. Michael opened his folder and pulled out a call log. Your father contacted our main office Sunday evening, claiming concern about your mental health and suggesting you might be making poor financial decisions that could indicate problems with judgment or stability. He specifically mentioned large family financial disputes and suggested we might want to review your access to client accounts, Jennifer added. Then your mother called Monday morning expressing worry about your erratic behavior and sudden personality changes related to money. The sophistication of their attack strategy left me speechless. My parents understood that my career required absolute trust in financial matters, and they'd targeted the one area where even unfounded suspicions could cause irreparable damage. They claimed you'd been making unusual financial commitments and then backing out of agreements suggesting possible mental health issues or problems with impulse control, Michael continued. Your mother specifically mentioned concerns about gambling or substance abuse affecting your decision-making abilities. Jennifer's expression softened slightly as she observed my genuine shock and distress. Eliza, your work performance has been exemplary for the past 5 years. Your client relationships are solid, your portfolio management is consistently above average, and you've never given us reason to question your professional judgment. But we have to take these allegations seriously, Michael added. Our clients trust us with their life savings and retirement funds. Any suggestion that an analyst might be experiencing personal problems that could affect their professional responsibilities requires investigation. They outlined the company's protocol for addressing potential employee issues, which included temporary suspension of access to high-value accounts pending a thorough review of my financial records and professional conduct over the past year. I need you to understand that this isn't personal, Eliza, Jennifer explained. The company has legal obligations to investigate any concerns about employee stability or judgment, especially in positions involving client financial management. The irony was suffocating. My parents were using my professional success and financial responsibility against me, claiming the very qualities that made me effective at my job were signs of mental instability or problematic behavior. My family is trying to force me into paying for my sister's mortgage. I said, my voice barely steady. When I refused, they've launched a campaign to pressure me into compliance by attacking every aspect of my life, including my career. Michael made notes as I explained the legal consultation, the forged documents, and the systematic manipulation campaign my parents had orchestrated. His expression shifted from professional suspicion to genuine concern as he realized I was the victim rather than the perpetrator of financial irregularities. Do you have documentation of these allegations against your family? Jennifer asked. I provided Patricia Brennan's contact information and explained the ongoing legal investigation into mortgage fraud and identity theft. The revelation that I'd hired an attorney and was pursuing criminal charges against my own parents added credibility to my version of events. We'll need to contact your attorney to verify the situation, Michael said. In the meantime, you'll continue working on current projects, but we're temporarily restricting your access to new client accounts and high-value transactions. The professional humiliation burned worse than any family betrayal. I'd spent years building my reputation at Morrison Financial Group, earning the trust of colleagues and clients through consistent performance and ethical behavior. Now my parents' manipulation campaign had introduced doubt into relationships I'd worked decades to establish. How many people in the office know about this investigation? I asked, dreading the answer. Currently, just the 3 of us and the compliance department head, Jennifer replied. But if this matter isn't resolved quickly, we may need to involve more senior management and possibly our legal department. I left the meeting with my career hanging in the balance, wondering how many other aspects of my life my parents planned to attack. Their willingness to jeopardize my professional reputation demonstrated a level of calculated cruelty I'd never imagined they possessed. The rest of the workday passed in a blur of strained normalcy as I tried to focus on routine tasks while processing the magnitude of my parents' assault on my livelihood. Colleagues who usually stop by my desk for friendly conversations seemed to maintain professional distance, suggesting rumors were already circulating, despite management's attempts at discretion. By 5 o'clock, I sat alone in my office reviewing the day's events and contemplating how quickly my stable, successful life had descended into chaos. My parents had weaponized every relationship I valued, turning my achievements into liabilities and my financial responsibility into evidence of character defects. The evening drive home took me past my sister's new house where lights glowed warmly in the windows and children's bicycles cluttered the front yard. The scene looked picture-perfect, a testament to family support and generational stability, while my own life crumbled under the weight of manufactured obligations and emotional terrorism. I realized then that my parents wouldn't stop with legal threats and family manipulation. They were prepared to destroy my career, my reputation, and my future in pursuit of their goal to force me into financial compliance with their schemes. The battle ahead would require every resource I possessed, and victory was far from guaranteed. 2 weeks after the workplace confrontation, Hannah called requesting a private lunch meeting at Rosemary's Cafe, a quiet restaurant downtown where we'd celebrated her graduation from beauty school years earlier. Her voice carried unusual vulnerability, suggesting she wanted to repair our relationship independently of our parents' legal threats. I arrived early, choosing a corner table near the windows where afternoon sunlight created a warm, intimate atmosphere. When Hannah entered wearing a flowing sundress and minimal makeup, she looked younger and more approachable than she had during recent family confrontations. "Eliza, thank you so much for meeting me," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I realized we need to talk sister to sister without Mom and Dad influencing the conversation." Her apparent sincerity caught me off guard. Despite everything, I still loved my sister and desperately wanted to believe we could find common ground that didn't involve financial manipulation or legal threats. "I'm glad you reached out, Hannah. This whole situation has gotten completely out of control." She nodded earnestly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know I haven't always made the best choices in my life. The kids' fathers weren't reliable. I struggled with school, and I've depended too much on family support. But I've been working really hard to get my life together." Hannah's phone sat prominently on the table beside her water glass, positioned at an unusual angle that seemed oddly deliberate. Something about its placement nagged at my subconscious, but I dismissed the feeling as paranoia brought on by weeks of family conflict. "I understand you're trying to provide stability for your children," I said carefully. "But the mortgage situation isn't something I ever agreed to, and the legal pressure from Mom and Dad has made everything worse." "I know, and I feel terrible about the way they've handled this," Hannah replied, leaning forward with apparent earnestness. "But put yourself in my position for a minute. I'm a single mother working part-time at a hair salon trying to raise 3 kids in a cramped apartment where the neighbors play loud music until 3 in the morning. She painted vivid pictures of her struggle, Sophie trying to do homework, while music pounded through thin walls, her middle child Tommy being bullied at his underfunded school, and her youngest daughter Emma having asthma attacks triggered by mold in their bathroom. The house isn't just about comfort, Eliza. It's about giving my children opportunities I never had. Better schools, safer neighborhoods, space to play and grow, without worrying about violence or drugs in the hallway. Her emotional appeal tugged at my heartstrings, reminding me why I'd always felt protective of my younger sister, despite her poor decisions. I genuinely wanted her children to thrive, but not at the expense of my own financial security. "Hannah, I understand your situation is difficult, but a $520,000 mortgage is a 30-year commitment. That's not casual family assistance. It's a major financial obligation that would affect my entire future." "But you make so much more money than me," she said, her tone shifting slightly. "Your salary alone is more than I'll probably earn in 5 years. You have savings investments and that beautiful apartment. Would it really affect your lifestyle that much to help family?" The familiar guilt manipulation began creeping into our conversation, but I noticed something strange about Hannah's behavior. Her eyes kept darting to her phone screen, and she occasionally paused mid-sentence as if checking something. "Are you expecting an important call?" I asked. "Oh, just worried about the kids," she replied quickly, but her hand moved protectively over the phone. "Emma has been having more asthma episodes since we toured the house and then couldn't move in immediately." The mention of her daughter's medical condition felt calculated, designed to increase emotional pressure while deflecting attention from her suspicious behavior with the phone. "Hannah, what's really going on here? You're acting nervous about something." Her composure cracked slightly, revealing a flash of the manipulative behavior I'd witnessed throughout our childhood. "I'm nervous because my whole future depends on this conversation, Eliza. My children's future depends on whether you decide to help family or prioritize your own comfort. That's not fair, and you know it. This isn't about comfort versus family support. This is about financial responsibility and legal obligations I never accepted." "Some people get lucky with brains and education," Hannah said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "Others struggle with learning disabilities and bad choices and difficult circumstances, but we're still family, and successful people should share their blessings with those who need help." The entitlement in her statement shocked me. She wasn't asking for assistance. She was demanding it as compensation for our different life outcomes, as if my education and career success were random gifts rather than the result of years of hard work and sacrifice. "I worked 3 jobs through college, Hannah. I lived on pasta and peanut butter sandwiches for 4 years while you were partying and dating. My success isn't luck. It's the result of choices and sacrifices you weren't willing to make." "So you think you're better than me?" She snapped, her mask of vulnerability finally slipping completely. "You think because you have a fancy job and expensive clothes that you deserve everything while my children deserve nothing?" The sudden personality shift confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. This entire lunch meeting was a performance designed to record my responses for use against me later. Her phone wasn't positioned randomly. It was strategically placed to capture our conversation. "Hannah, are you recording this conversation?" Her face flushed red, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she lifted her chin defiantly. "I have every right to document how my successful sister treats her struggling family members." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. She'd invited me to lunch under false pretenses, performed concern and vulnerability to manipulate my emotions, and secretly recorded our private conversation to use as evidence against me. "How long have you been recording our conversations?" "Long enough to show everyone who you really are," she replied, abandoning all pretense of sisterly affection. "I have hours of recordings where you sound selfish and materialistic, caring more about your precious savings account than your own nieces and nephew." The sophisticated nature of her deception revealed planning and coordination that went far beyond spontaneous family conflict. She'd been systematically gathering evidence to support their legal case while presenting herself as an innocent victim of my alleged selfishness. "You've been editing these recordings, haven't you? Taking my words out of context to make me sound worse than I am." Hannah's smile held no warmth, only cold satisfaction. "I've been showing people the real Eliza, the one who thinks she's too good for her family now that she has money and success." I stood up from the table, my hands shaking with a combination of anger and heartbreak. The sister I'd grown up loving and protecting had become a stranger willing to deceive and manipulate me for financial gain. "This conversation is over, Hannah. If you want to continue this battle, we'll settle it in court with real evidence instead of manufactured lies." As I walked away, I heard her call after me, "You'll regret abandoning family Eliza. There are consequences for people who forget where they came from." The threat in her voice chilled me more than any legal document my parents had produced. My own sister had declared war on my character, my reputation, and my future, using my love for her children as ammunition in a campaign designed to destroy my resistance to their financial demands. The following Monday morning, I met with Patricia Brennan, armed with documentation of Hannah's recording scheme and a growing suspicion that my family's manipulation extended beyond forged signatures and manufactured emails. Patricia's office buzzed with activity as her paralegal Jennifer Walsh organized bankers' boxes filled with financial records we'd requested through legal discovery. "Eliza, what we've uncovered goes far beyond simple mortgage fraud," Patricia said, spreading credit reports and bank statements across her conference table. "Your family has been systematically using your personal information to access credit and financial services for years." The first document she showed me was a credit card application dated 18 months ago, bearing my name and social security number, but listing an address I'd never lived at. The card had been used to purchase furniture, electronics, and home improvement supplies totaling nearly $30,000. The billing address matches a post office box your parents rented specifically to receive statements for accounts opened in your name. Jennifer explained, highlighting relevant sections with yellow marker. They've been intercepting mail and making minimum payments to keep the accounts active without triggering alerts. My hands trembled as I reviewed additional fraudulent accounts, a store credit card for luxury appliances, a home improvement loan for kitchen renovations I'd never authorized, and a personal loan that had been used to pay Hannah's rent for the past year. "The total fraudulent debt in your name exceeds $200,000, Patricia said grimly. "They've been building this financial house of cards for nearly 5 years, using your excellent credit score to fund Hannah's lifestyle, while making just enough payments to avoid default notices." The systematic nature of their theft took my breath away. Every family dinner where they'd praised my financial responsibility had been reconnaissance gathering for their identity theft operation. Every casual question about my address, changes, employment details, or banking information had been data collection for fraudulent applications. How did they get access to my personal information? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Jennifer pulled out a folder labeled Identity Theft Evidence and showed me photocopies of documents I'd never seen before. My birth certificate, social security card, and driver's license information had been copied and stored in what appeared to be my parents' home filing system. "They've had access to your vital documents since childhood," Patricia explained. "But more concerning is this evidence that they've been monitoring your credit reports and financial accounts without authorization." She showed me printed copies of my credit reports dating back 3 years, annotated in my mother's handwriting, with notes about available credit limits and payment history. Someone had been tracking my financial capacity with the precision of a professional loan officer. The mortgage fraud was intended to legitimize all these hidden debts, Jennifer continued. Once you were legally responsible for Hannah's house payments, they planned to gradually reveal the other accounts as family emergency, situations that required your assistance. The long-term strategy was breathtakingly cruel. My parents hadn't just stolen my money. They'd planned to trap me in a web of financial obligations that would have consumed my savings, destroyed my credit, and eliminated my ability to build independent wealth. "Can we prove they were planning to reveal more debt gradually?" I asked. Patricia opened her laptop and showed me a document that made my blood run cold, a spreadsheet titled Eliza Financial Capacity Analysis, with detailed calculations of my salary expenses and potential debt service capability. "Your mother created this financial plan showing how much additional debt you could theoretically handle while maintaining minimum living expenses," she said. "It includes projections for gradually increasing your financial responsibility for Hannah's family over a 10-year period." The spreadsheet was terrifyingly thorough accounting for my expected salary increases, potential investment returns, and even estimated costs for my own future marriage and children. They'd planned to consume not just my current financial capacity, but my entire future earning potential. "There's more." Jennifer said, producing bank records that showed wire transfers from the fraudulent accounts to pay for Hannah's car payments, insurance premiums, and children's extracurricular activities. They weren't just stealing money, they were laundering it through your sister's expenses to make the fraud harder to detect. The paper trail revealed a criminal enterprise that had been operating under my nose for years. Every family gathering where Hannah had seemed stressed about money, every casual mention of financial struggles, had been theater designed to justify the theft of my financial identity. "What's our legal position for recovery?" I asked, struggling to process the magnitude of their betrayal. "The federal charges will be substantial," Patricia said. "Identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and money laundering. We're looking at potential prison sentences of 15 to 20 years if they're convicted on all counts." But the criminal charges were only part of our strategy. The civil lawsuit would seek full restitution for stolen funds damages, for credit repair costs, and compensation for the emotional distress and professional damage their scheme had caused. "Here's what troubles me most about the timeline," Jennifer said, consulting her notes. "The mortgage application was submitted the same week you received your promotion to senior analyst. They weren't just stealing from your current income, they were stealing from future earning potential they'd calculated with remarkable precision. The revelation that my parents had been tracking my career progress to optimize their theft strategy felt like the ultimate violation. They'd celebrated my professional achievements while simultaneously planning to steal the financial security those achievements represented. "How long will it take to clear my credit and recover the stolen funds?" I asked. "With criminal convictions, probably 2 to 3 years for full financial recovery," Patricia replied. "But the emotional and family relationship damage may never fully heal." As I left Patricia's office that afternoon, I carried copies of evidence that painted my parents not as misguided family members, but as sophisticated criminals who'd built a multi-year conspiracy around stealing my financial identity. The people who'd raised me to value honesty and integrity had become strangers willing to destroy my future for their own benefit. The drive home took me past Hannah's new house where my stolen money had paid for the down payment and closing costs. The beautiful suburban home with its manicured lawn and children's playground represented not family support, but criminal proceeds from years of systematic theft. I realized then that recovery would require more than just legal victories and financial restitution. I needed to rebuild my entire understanding of family relationships and learn to protect myself from people who'd weaponized my love against my own security and well-being. Wednesday afternoon, I returned home from work to find a crowd gathered outside my apartment complex, their voices carrying across the parking lot like a swarm of angry insects. Hannah stood on the sidewalk holding a cardboard sign reading, "Family abandons children," while her 3 kids sat on a blanket nearby looking confused and tired. News van antennas extended toward the sky like metal trees, and a reporter with perfectly styled hair spoke earnestly into a camera while gesturing toward my building. My stomach dropped as I realized my family's manipulation campaign had escalated to public humiliation and media involvement. I parked 2 blocks away and walked back, pulling my jacket hood up to avoid recognition. The crowd included neighbors I'd lived near for 3 years, local residents drawn by the commotion, and what appeared to be members of Hannah's church community, holding handmade signs supporting her cause. My sister promised to help us get a stable home for the children. Hannah's voice carried over the crowd as she spoke to the reporter. But when it came time to honor her commitment, she decided her savings account was more important than her own nieces and nephew. Little Sophie held a smaller sign reading, "Please help our family," in crayon lettering that was clearly adult-guided. Her innocent participation in the manipulation tactic made me feel physically ill, knowing my sister was using her own children as props in an emotional blackmail scheme. The reporter, a young woman with ambitious energy and a microphone bearing the local news station's logo, asked leading questions designed to maximize drama and viewer sympathy. How has this family conflict affected the children's living situation? "We might lose our house because Eliza changed her mind about helping family," Hannah replied, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "The kids have already started at their new school and made friends in the neighborhood. They don't understand why their successful aunt would abandon them now." I watched from behind a parked car as Hannah's performance continued painting me as a wealthy, heartless sister who'd callously broken promises to struggling family members. The story was perfectly crafted for social media outrage, with innocent children, family betrayal, and economic inequality, creating an irresistible narrative for public consumption. My phone buzzed with notifications as the story went viral on local Facebook groups and neighborhood social media platforms. Comments ranged from supportive to viciously critical, with strangers making judgments about my character based on Hannah's carefully constructed version of events. "Some people get so successful they forget where they came from," one comment read. Another added, "Those poor children deserve better than a selfish aunt who cares more about money than family." The most devastating comments came from neighbors and community members who recognized my name in apartment building. "I live in her complex and she drives a new car while her sister's kids might be homeless. Disgusting behavior." By evening, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets and shared thousands of times across social media platforms. Videos showed edited clips of Hannah tearfully describing my alleged broken promises, while her children played innocently in the background. The narrative had been skillfully crafted to exclude any mention of forged documents, identity theft, or fraudulent mortgage applications. Instead, it presented a simple story of family conflict, where a successful woman had abandoned her struggling sister and innocent children for selfish financial reasons. My landlord, Mrs. Peterson, called that evening to express concern about the negative publicity affecting the apartment complex's reputation. Other tenants had complained about the news crews and protesters, and she gently suggested I might consider finding alternative housing until the family dispute resolved. "I understand this is a difficult personal situation," she said carefully, "but the disruption is affecting other residents, and some have expressed concern about their own safety and privacy." The professional consequences came swiftly as well. My supervisor at Morrison Financial Group called to inform me that clients had seen the news coverage and raised questions about my stability and judgment. The company was considering additional restrictions on my responsibilities until the matter resolved. "Public relations problems can affect client trust," Jennifer Stevens explained. "We need to protect both you and the firm's reputation during this challenging time." That night, I sat in my apartment with the curtains drawn, reading hundreds of comments from strangers who'd formed strong opinions about my character, based on Hannah's carefully orchestrated public relations campaign. The isolation was suffocating. Knowing that my reputation and relationships were being destroyed by lies I couldn't publicly refute without compromising the ongoing legal investigation. The cruelest aspect was Hannah's use of her children as unwitting participants in the manipulation. Sophie and her siblings had no understanding of mortgage fraud or family financial dynamics. They only knew their mother was upset, and somehow their aunt was responsible for their distress. I realized then that my parents and sister weren't just attacking my financial security, they were systematically destroying every aspect of my life to force compliance with their demands. They understood that social pressure and public humiliation could be more effective than legal threats in breaking down my resistance. The media coverage also revealed the sophisticated nature of their manipulation strategy. They'd timed the public campaign to coincide with maximum emotional impact, using innocent children and economic hardship to generate sympathy while avoiding any mention of their own criminal behavior. As I prepared for bed, protesters still gathered outside my building, their voices carrying through my windows like a constant reminder of how completely my life had been turned upside down by family members who claimed to love me. The battle ahead would require not just legal victory, but the strength to withstand public condemnation based on lies I couldn't yet openly challenge. The phone call that shattered the last stable relationship in my life came on Friday evening while I sat in my apartment avoiding the lingering media attention outside. David's voice carried an unfamiliar coldness that immediately put me on alert. "Eliza, we need to talk," he said without his usual warm greeting. "Can you meet me at Morrison Park in 30 minutes? David and I had been together for 2 years, building what I'd believed was a strong foundation based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. He'd been my anchor through the recent family crisis, offering emotional support and logical perspective when manipulation and chaos threatened to overwhelm me. I found him sitting on our favorite bench overlooking the pond where we'd shared countless Sunday afternoon conversations about our future together. His body language was rigid and distant, and he avoided making eye contact when I approached. "David, what's wrong? You sounded upset on the phone." He turned to face me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of disappointment and wary concern that made my heart race with anxiety. "Your parents called me yesterday," he said slowly. "They wanted to discuss some concerning things about your mental health and recent behavior." The ground seemed to shift beneath me as I realized my family had expanded their attack to include my romantic relationship. They'd weaponized David's care for me against our bond, using his love as another tool for manipulation and control. "What did they tell you?" "They said you've been having episodes of erratic behavior, making impulsive financial decisions, and then backing out when you realize the consequences." David replied, his voice carefully measured. "They suggested you might be developing the same mental health issues that affected your grandfather." My grandfather had struggled with bipolar disorder during an era when mental health treatment was primitive and stigmatized. My parents were exploiting both David's limited knowledge of my family history and society's lingering prejudices about mental illness. They mentioned gambling problems, substance abuse, and possible personality disorders that run in your family. David continued, "Your mother was crying, saying she was worried about your safety and the safety of people around you." The sophistication of their psychological manipulation was breathtaking. They'd identified David's protective instincts and caring nature, then fed him carefully crafted concerns that would make him question my stability and honesty rather than their motives. "David, my family is trying to force me into paying for my sister's mortgage through fraud and legal intimidation. Everything they told you is part of that manipulation campaign." He studied my face with the analytical expression he used when evaluating complex engineering problems at his job. "But how do I know what's real anymore, Eliza? This whole situation is completely outside my experience. Normal families don't have these kinds of conflicts." "Exactly why they chose to target you," I said, recognizing how effectively my parents had exploited David's stable family background and trusting nature. They knew you wouldn't immediately recognize manipulation tactics because you've never experienced them. David stood up and walked to the pond's edge, throwing pebbles into the water with unnecessary force. "Your mother showed me medical records suggesting a family history of mental illness and financial irresponsibility. She had documentation going back generations." The revelation that my parents had manufactured or manipulated medical records to support their psychological warfare against me represented a new level of criminal behavior. They'd violated not just my financial privacy, but my medical privacy as well. "What kind of documentation?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "Hospital admission records for your grandfather, court documents from your uncle's bankruptcy, and what appeared to be psychological evaluation reports suggesting genetic predisposition to mental health issues affecting judgment and decision-making." The fabricated evidence was clearly designed to make David question everything about our relationship, while positioning my parents as concerned family members trying to protect him from my supposedly dangerous instability. "David, I've been working with an attorney to document years of identity theft and financial fraud by my parents. This isn't about my mental health, it's about their criminal behavior." "But that's exactly what someone with mental health issues would say," he replied, the doubt evident in his voice. How can I distinguish between reality and paranoid delusions when everything is so complicated and dramatic? The impossible position my parents had created was maddening. Any attempt to explain their manipulation sounded paranoid, while their manufactured evidence and tearful concern appeared rational and credible to someone unfamiliar with their tactics. We've been together for 2 years, David. Have I ever shown signs of instability, poor judgment, or irresponsible behavior during our entire relationship? He was quiet for a long moment, obviously wrestling with conflicting information and emotions. No, but mental health issues can develop gradually, and stress can trigger episodes in people with genetic predisposition. So you're choosing to believe my parents over your own experience with me. I'm trying to make sense of a situation where everyone is telling me different things, and I don't have enough information to know who's being honest, he said, frustration evident in his voice. The conversation continued for another hour, with David expressing concerns that had been carefully planted by my parents, and me attempting to provide rational explanations that sounded increasingly desperate even to my own ears. I need some time apart to think about everything, David finally said. This relationship has become too complicated and stressful for me to handle right now. Walking back to my car alone, I realized my parents had successfully isolated me from every significant relationship in my life. They'd turned family against me, jeopardized my career, mobilized community opinion, and now destroyed my romantic partnership through systematic psychological manipulation. The drive home felt surreal, as if I were living someone else's nightmare rather than my own life. In less than a month, my parents had transformed me from a successful, well-connected professional into a social pariah, fighting criminal charges and public condemnation while defending my sanity and integrity against manufactured evidence. That night, I sat in my empty apartment reviewing the devastation my family had inflicted on every aspect of my existence. They'd understood that isolation would make me more vulnerable to their demands, so they'd systematically eliminated every source of emotional support and stability in my life. But underneath the heartbreak and exhaustion, anger began to crystallize into determination. My parents had underestimated my resilience and legal resources, assuming I would eventually capitulate under pressure rather than fight back effectively. They were about to discover how wrong that assumption had been. Patricia Brennan introduced me to private investigator Marcus Thompson on a gray Thursday morning in her law office. Marcus was a former federal agent with 25 years of experience investigating financial crimes, and his weathered face carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen every type of fraud and manipulation imaginable. Eliza Marcus has been conducting background research on your family's financial history, Patricia said, gesturing toward the thick folders spread across her conference table. What he's discovered goes far beyond the mortgage fraud we originally investigated. Marcus opened his laptop and pulled up a timeline that made my blood run cold. Your parents have been running variations of this same financial manipulation scheme for over 8 years, targeting different family members and romantic partners connected to your sister. The first entry on his timeline dated back to Hannah's marriage to her first husband, Robert Miller, a military contractor earning $75,000 annually. Within 6 months of their wedding, Hannah's parents had convinced Robert to co-sign a loan for Hannah's business investment that turned out to be a luxury vacation and shopping spree. Robert told me he was pressured into multiple financial commitments under the guise of family emergencies and investment opportunities, Marcus explained. By the time their divorce was finalized, he'd accumulated over $40,000 in debt that was technically his responsibility, but had solely benefited Hannah and her lifestyle. The pattern continued through Hannah's subsequent relationships. Her second boyfriend, a successful restaurant owner named Christopher Davis, had been manipulated into paying for Hannah's cosmetic surgery under the pretense that improved self-confidence would help her find stable employment. Christopher described the same tactics your parents used against you, Marcus continued. Emotional manipulation manufactured family crises and social pressure from extended family members who'd been fed carefully crafted stories about his generous commitment to help Hannah. The most disturbing revelation involved Hannah's children's fathers, who'd been systematically pursued through aggressive legal tactics designed to maximize child support payments regardless of their actual financial capacity or involvement in their children's lives. Your parents hired private attorneys to pursue each father for maximum support payments, often exceeding state guidelines through claims of special needs and extraordinary expenses. Marcus said, showing me court documents that painted my parents as advocates for their grandchildren while pursuing punitive financial judgments. Marcus had interviewed 7 different individuals who'd been targeted by my parents' manipulation schemes over the years, each following a predictable pattern identification of financially successful people in Hannah's orbit cultivation of artificial relationships and obligations, and systematic pressure to provide monetary support disguised as family assistance or emergency aid. The sophistication of their operation impressed even me, Marcus admitted. They maintain detailed financial profiles of potential targets, monitor credit reports and career advancement, and time their approaches to maximize psychological pressure and legal leverage. He showed me copies of a filing system my parents maintained that included background checks, financial records, and psychological profiles of family members and romantic interests they considered viable targets for manipulation. "Your file is the most comprehensive," Marcus said, opening a folder labeled with my name that contained detailed information about my education career, progression, salary history, and personal relationships dating back to college. The invasion of privacy was staggering. They'd tracked my professional development with the precision of criminal investigators, documenting every promotion, salary increase, and career opportunity while planning how to exploit my success for Hannah's benefit. "They've been planning the mortgage scheme specifically for over 3 years," Marcus continued. "The timeline coincides with your promotion to senior analyst and the resulting salary increase that made you capable of supporting a significant mortgage payment." Marcus had also uncovered evidence that my parents operated with Hannah's full knowledge and active participation in identifying and cultivating targets. She wasn't a helpless victim of their manipulation. She was a willing partner who helped select and emotionally manipulate the people who funded her lifestyle. Hannah provided personal information about her romantic partner's financial situations, emotional vulnerabilities, and family relationships that your parents used to optimize their manipulation strategies, Marcus explained. The revelation that my sister had been actively participating in the systematic exploitation of people who cared about her represented a level of betrayal I'd never imagined possible. She'd weaponized intimacy and trust as tools for financial predation. "What's their current legal exposure?" I asked, struggling to process the scope of their criminal enterprise. Federal prosecutors are reviewing evidence of organized financial fraud conspiracy to commit theft and racketeering charges that could result in significant prison sentences, Marcus replied. The pattern of behavior over multiple years with different victims elevates this beyond simple family financial disputes. Patricia added that the civil litigation would seek restitution from all affected parties, including recovery of fraudulent payments made to Hannah and compensation for damages suffered by previous victims who'd been too embarrassed or intimidated to pursue legal action. The good news is that this evidence completely destroys their credibility and public sympathy campaign, Marcus said. When people understand they've been running a multi-year criminal enterprise targeting family members and romantic partners, the narrative changes from family dispute to organized crime. I left that meeting with a complex mixture of vindication and heartbreak. The evidence would ultimately clear my reputation and result in criminal consequences for my parents and sister. But it also confirmed that the people I'd grown up loving had never viewed me as family, but rather as a financial resource to be exploited when opportunities arose. The drive home took me past the elementary school where Hannah and I had played together as children, sharing dreams and secrets, and planning our futures as sisters who would always support each other. That innocent relationship felt like a lifetime ago, replaced by the harsh reality that my family had systematically planned to steal my financial security through sophisticated criminal manipulation spanning nearly a decade. But for the first time in weeks, I felt hope beginning to replace despair. The evidence Marcus had gathered would not only vindicate my position, but help other victims of my family's manipulation schemes seek justice and recovery for their own losses. The emergency room drama began on a Tuesday evening when Hannah rushed 8-year-old Emma to Children's Hospital, claiming the child was experiencing severe anxiety symptoms that required immediate medical attention. Within hours, local news crews were broadcasting live from the hospital parking lot as Hannah tearfully explained how family conflict was literally making her children sick. My daughter has been having panic attacks and difficulty breathing ever since we learned we might lose our house. Hannah told the cameras, cradling Emma, who appeared pale and listless in her arms. The stress of housing instability is affecting all my children, but Emma is the most sensitive. She keeps asking why Aunt Eliza doesn't love us anymore. The reporter, eager for a compelling follow-up to the previous week's viral story, asked leading questions designed to maximize emotional impact. How has your sister's refusal to honor her family commitments affected your children's health? Hannah's response was perfectly crafted for maximum sympathy and social media outrage. Emma told the doctors she's scared we'll have to live in our car if we lose the house. She's 8 years old and she shouldn't have to worry about homelessness because her wealthy aunt changed her mind about helping family. I watched the news coverage from my apartment, recognizing immediately that this medical emergency was another carefully orchestrated manipulation tactic. Emma's symptoms appeared genuine, but the timing and circumstances suggested they'd been manufactured or exaggerated for maximum emotional leverage. My phone exploded with notifications as the story spread across social media platforms. Comments ranged from outraged condemnation of my alleged cruelty to heartfelt sympathy for innocent children suffering due to adult family conflicts. That poor baby shouldn't have to suffer because her selfish aunt cares more about money than family, one comment read. Another added, children's health should come before personal wealth. This woman needs to examine her priorities. The most disturbing aspect was watching my 8-year-old niece being used as a prop in her mother's manipulation campaign. Emma had been coached to express fears about homelessness and abandonment, traumatizing her with anxieties about adult financial conflicts she couldn't possibly understand. Hannah's performance at the hospital included specific medical claims designed to establish urgency around the mortgage situation. She told doctors and reporters that Emma's symptoms had worsened since learning about potential housing instability, creating a direct causal link between my financial refusal and her daughter's medical crisis. The pediatrician said stress can manifest as physical symptoms in sensitive children, Hannah explained to the cameras. Emma has always been close to her aunt, and she doesn't understand why someone she loves would abandon our family when we need help most. The emotional manipulation reached new depths of cruelty as Hannah exploited her own child's genuine confusion and distress to generate public pressure against me. Emma's tears and obvious anxiety were real, even if the circumstances creating them had been deliberately manufactured. Local news stations picked up the story, immediately framing it as an update on the ongoing family conflict with the added element of innocent children suffering medical consequences. The narrative reinforced Hannah's version of events while completely ignoring the criminal fraud investigation that had prompted my legal resistance. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the attending pediatrician, was quoted saying that childhood anxiety could indeed be triggered by family instability and housing concerns. Her professional medical opinion lent credibility to Hannah's claims, even though she had no knowledge of the underlying fraud and manipulation creating the family conflict. Children Emma's age are particularly vulnerable to anxiety when they sense their parents are stressed about basic needs, like housing security. Dr. Martinez explained to reporters, It's not uncommon for family financial disputes to manifest as pediatric anxiety disorders. The hospital visit generated hours of compelling television content as Hannah maintained bedside vigil while providing regular updates to media outlets about Emma's condition and her family's desperate need for housing stability. Social media response was overwhelmingly supportive of Hannah and condemning of me. Videos of Emma looking pale and frightened in her hospital bed were shared thousands of times, accompanied by harsh criticism of my alleged selfishness and family abandonment. This is what happens when successful people forget their responsibilities to family. One viral comment read, "That little girl is in the hospital because her aunt chose money over love." The medical manipulation also served to increase pressure from extended family members who'd been following the public drama with growing concern. Aunt Margaret called that evening, her voice thick with emotion and disappointment. "Eliza Catherine, that precious child, is in the hospital because of this family conflict," she said, using the guilt-inducing tone that had controlled my behavior throughout childhood. "How can you let your pride and selfishness affect an innocent baby's health?" I tried explaining that Emma's medical situation was being exploited for manipulation purposes, but that explanation sounded callous and defensive when presented to family members who'd been fed months of carefully crafted lies about my character and motivations. "Your own niece is suffering and all you can talk about is manipulation and legal nonsense," Aunt Margaret continued. "What has happened to the caring, responsible girl we raised?" The impossible position my family had created was maddening. Any attempt to challenge their narrative appeared to confirm their claims about my selfishness and lack of concern for family welfare, while accepting responsibility for Emma's medical crisis would validate their fraudulent demands. That night, I called Patricia Brennan to discuss the latest escalation in my family's manipulation campaign. She confirmed that using a child's medical condition as leverage in civil litigation constituted additional criminal behavior that would strengthen our case. "They're now guilty of child exploitation and emotional abuse, in addition to the financial crimes," Patricia explained. "Using Emma's genuine distress as a weapon against you demonstrates a level of calculated cruelty that will horrify judges and juries." But the immediate damage to my reputation and emotional well-being was devastating regardless of eventual legal vindication. My family had crossed every moral boundary in their quest to force my financial compliance, proving they would sacrifice even their children's psychological health to achieve their goals. As I prepared for sleep that night, news coverage continued showing Emma in her hospital bed, while Hannah tearfully pleaded for family reconciliation and housing stability. The sight of my frightened niece being used as ammunition in her mother's criminal scheme broke my heart while strengthening my resolve to fight back against their increasingly desperate manipulation tactics. Friday morning brought the most significant development in our legal strategy, when Patricia Brennan arranged a meeting with federal prosecutor Jennifer Walsh at the U.S. Attorney's Office downtown. The imposing government building with its marble corridors and official portraits represented the serious criminal nature my family's behavior had reached. Ms. Rodriguez, what began as a civil family dispute has evolved into a complex federal criminal investigation. Prosecutor Walsh said reviewing the extensive evidence Marcus Thompson and Patricia's team had compiled. The scope of financial crimes and the pattern of behavior over multiple years elevates this case significantly beyond simple fraud. Jennifer Walsh was a veteran federal prosecutor with 15 years of experience handling white-collar crime and organized financial conspiracies. Her reputation for thoroughness and aggressive pursuit of complex fraud cases made her involvement both reassuring and intimidating. The mortgage fraud involving forged signatures and falsified documents constitutes multiple federal felonies. She continued consulting notes from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. But the systematic identity theft wire fraud and money laundering over a 5-year period suggests organized criminal enterprise rather than isolated incidents. Patricia spread timeline documents across the conference table, highlighting the sophisticated coordination between my parents and Hannah in targeting multiple victims over nearly a decade. The evidence shows clear conspiracy and racketeering patterns that fall under federal organized crime statutes. The revelation that my family's behavior qualified for prosecution under racketeering laws, typically reserved for organized crime syndicates, was both vindicating and surreal. The people who'd raised me to respect law and authority had become criminals sophisticated enough to warrant federal investigation. Here's what concerns us most about the banking violations. Prosecutor Walsh said pulling up computer records showing the fraudulent mortgage application process. Your parents submitted falsified income documentation and forged signatures to obtain a federally backed mortgage loan worth over $500,000. The mortgage fraud alone carried potential sentences of up to 30 years in federal prison, but the systematic pattern of identity theft and financial manipulation across multiple victims could result in consecutive sentences that would effectively guarantee life imprisonment for my parents. The hospital manipulation involving your niece adds charges of child exploitation and emotional abuse, Walsh continued. Using a minor child as leverage in criminal conspiracy demonstrates a level of calculated cruelty that federal judges take very seriously. Marcus Thompson joined our meeting to present evidence of the broader criminal enterprise, including detailed financial records showing how stolen money had been laundered through Hannah's living expenses and discretionary purchases over multiple years. The paper trail shows systematic conversion of fraudulently obtained funds into lifestyle maintenance for Hannah and her children. Marcus explained, car payments, insurance premiums, vacation expenses, and luxury purchases, all funded through identity theft and credit fraud targeting family members and romantic partners. Patricia outlined our comprehensive legal strategy that would address both criminal prosecution and civil recovery. The federal charges would seek prison sentences and criminal restitution, while our civil lawsuit would pursue additional damages for emotional distress, professional harm, and punitive awards to deter future similar behavior. The evidence is overwhelming for criminal convictions, Walsh said, but we want to explore plea agreement possibilities that might encourage cooperation and full disclosure of the criminal enterprise's scope and methods. The possibility of plea agreements raised complex emotional questions about my willingness to accept reduced sentences for family members who'd systematically betrayed and exploited me for years. Part of me wanted maximum penalties for their crimes, while another part hoped they might eventually acknowledge their behavior and seek genuine redemption. What kind of sentences are we looking at for full prosecution versus plea agreements? I asked. Without cooperation, your parents face 15 to 25 years in federal prison, Walsh replied. Hannah could receive 10 to 15 years depending on her level of participation versus victimization by your parents' manipulation. The plea agreement options would require full financial disclosure cooperation in identifying other victims and acceptance of responsibility for criminal behavior in exchange for reduced sentences and supervised probation rather than extended imprisonment. We need to consider that prison sentences won't help you recover stolen funds or repair damaged relationships, Patricia added. Plea agreements with restitution requirements might better serve your long-term interests. The meeting concluded with a clear timeline for federal charges being filed within 2 weeks, giving my parents and Hannah opportunities to consider cooperation and plea negotiations before facing the full weight of criminal prosecution. Walking from the federal building to Patricia's office, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness that my family's criminal behavior had necessitated involvement of federal law enforcement and prosecutors. The legal system would ultimately deliver justice, but it couldn't restore the family relationships their betrayal had destroyed. How do you feel about the federal charges? Patricia asked as we reviewed our next steps. Relieved that someone finally believes me, but heartbroken that it came to this, I replied honestly. I never wanted my family to go to prison, but I also couldn't let them destroy my life without consequences. The afternoon was spent preparing for the media strategy that would accompany criminal charges being filed. The public narrative would shift dramatically once people understood the sophisticated criminal enterprise my family had operated, rather than the simple family financial dispute they'd portrayed. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing legal documents that would soon transform my parents from concerned family members into federal defendants facing serious prison time. The reversal felt surreal, but it also represented hope for justice and recovery after weeks of systematic attack on every aspect of my life. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was fighting back effectively rather than simply defending against endless manipulation and emotional terrorism from people who claim to love me while systematically destroying my security and well-being. The breakthrough in our case came through an unexpected phone call on Monday morning when Cousin Sarah contacted Patricia Brennan's office, her voice shaking with nervous energy as she requested an emergency meeting to discuss financial problems with Uncle Richard and Aunt Martha that might be related to Eliza's situation. Sarah arrived at Patricia's office carrying a banker's box filled with financial documents, her usual confident demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety and embarrassment. At 32, she'd always been the family's success story, building a thriving accounting practice while maintaining close relationships with extended relatives who respected her professional expertise. "I've been following Eliza's legal situation in the news," Sarah said, settling into the conference room chair with obvious discomfort. "When I heard about the identity theft and financial manipulation, I realized I might have been a victim of the same scheme without fully understanding what was happening." Patricia opened her notebook and activated a digital recorder with Sarah's permission, recognizing that we might be uncovering additional victims who could strengthen our criminal case against my parents. 3 years ago, Hannah asked me to co-sign a car loan because her credit was poor and she needed reliable transportation for her job at the hair salon. Sarah began pulling documents from her box. Uncle Richard and Aunt Martha presented it as a family emergency and temporary assistance that would help Hannah get back on her feet. The car loan paperwork revealed the same manipulation tactics my parents had used against me, manufactured urgency emotional appeals about Hannah's children needing stability and social pressure from family members who'd been convinced that successful relatives had obligations to help struggling family members. The loan was for $28,000, which seemed reasonable for a reliable used car, Sarah continued. But Hannah immediately traded that car for a more expensive model, leaving me responsible for payments on a vehicle she no longer owned. Sarah's experience included additional financial manipulation beyond the original car loan. Over the following 2 years, my parents had approached her for emergency assistance, with Hannah's medical bills, childcare expenses, and legal fees related to child support disputes with her children's fathers. Every request was presented as a one-time emergency that would be repaid quickly, Sarah explained. But the repayments never came, and new emergencies always seemed to arise just as I was starting to question the pattern. Patricia took detailed notes as Sarah described the emotional manipulation tactics that accompanied each financial request, guilt about family loyalty comparisons to her professional success versus Hannah's struggles, and subtle threats about being excluded from family gatherings if she didn't demonstrate appropriate generosity. Uncle Richard specifically mentioned that other family members were contributing to Hannah's support and that my refusal to help would make me appear selfish and uncaring compared to relatives who understood family obligations. The revelation that my parents had been manipulating multiple family members simultaneously explained how they'd maintained their scheme for so long without detection. Each victim believed they were the only family member being asked for assistance, preventing communication that might have revealed the larger pattern of exploitation. "Did they ever mention specific amounts that other family members were contributing?" Patricia asked. "Yes, and now I realize those claims were probably fabricated to pressure me into larger commitments," Sarah replied. They said Cousin Robert had co-signed Hannah's apartment lease. Uncle David had paid for Emma's medical expenses, and Grandmother Rose had helped with legal fees. Patricia contacted each family member Sarah mentioned, discovering that everyone had been approached for financial assistance, using similar manipulation tactics and false claims about other relatives' contributions to Hannah's support. Uncle Robert confirmed he'd been pressured into paying for Hannah's wedding expenses 5 years earlier, presented as a contribution to a larger fund that other family members were supposedly supporting. The total amount exceeded $15,000, which he'd never been repaid despite promises of gradual reimbursement. They made it sound like everyone was chipping in to give Hannah a beautiful wedding after her difficult divorce, Robert explained during our conference call. I felt obligated to contribute because they claimed my parents and siblings had already committed substantial amounts. Most shocking was the discovery that my grandmother's estate had been systematically drained through fraudulent medical expenses and legal fees that my parents had submitted for reimbursement. Grandmother Rose, now in assisted living with early-stage dementia, had unknowingly signed checks totaling nearly $40,000 for expenses that were either completely fictitious or grossly inflated. The assisted living facility's financial administrator became suspicious when the medical expense reimbursements exceeded Grandmother Rose's actual medical costs by significant amounts, Patricia explained after speaking with the facility's management. The pattern of exploitation extended across 3 generations of our family, with my parents identifying and targeting any relative who achieved financial stability or had access to resources that could benefit Hannah's lifestyle. Marcus Thompson's investigation revealed that the total amount stolen from extended family members exceeded $150,000 over 8 years, representing a systematic criminal enterprise that had operated with remarkable sophistication and cruelty. Your parents created a family-wide Ponzi scheme, Patricia explained. Each victim was told that other family members were contributing, creating artificial social pressure, while preventing communication that might expose the larger fraud. The emotional impact of learning that my beloved grandmother had been systematically defrauded by her own son was devastating. Grandmother Rose had always been our family's moral center, teaching values of honesty, integrity, and genuine care for others that my parents had completely abandoned in pursuit of financial gain. But the discovery also provided crucial evidence for our federal case and connected us with additional victims who could testify about my parents' long-term pattern of financial manipulation and family exploitation. Will these family members be willing to cooperate with the criminal prosecution? I asked. They're eager to see justice, Patricia replied. Everyone feels embarrassed about being manipulated, but they're also angry about the systematic betrayal of family trust and values. That evening, I called Sarah to thank her for coming forward and exposing the broader scope of my family's criminal enterprise. Her courage in revealing her own victimization had provided evidence that would strengthen our case, while helping other family members understand they weren't alone in being manipulated and exploited. I just couldn't stand watching you go through this alone when I knew there was more to the story, Sarah said. Families should protect each other, not prey on each other the way Uncle Richard and Aunt Martha have been doing. The revelation that my parents had systematically victimized our entire extended family transformed my understanding of their behavior from targeted manipulation to organized criminal enterprise that had operated under our noses for nearly a decade. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity on the morning of November 15th as United States vs. Richard Rodriguez, Martha Rodriguez, and Hannah Miller officially commenced before Judge Catherine Morrison. The packed gallery included family members, reporters, and federal agents who'd investigated the complex financial conspiracy that had destroyed my faith in family bonds while strengthening my resolve to seek justice. My parents sat at the defendant's table wearing their best clothes and expressions of wounded dignity, still maintaining the facade that they were misunderstood family members rather than sophisticated criminals who'd operated a multi-year fraud enterprise. Hannah's attorney had negotiated a separate proceeding, but she sat in the gallery looking pale and anxious as potential testimony against her parents. Judge Morrison, a 60-year-old former prosecutor with steel gray hair and a reputation for no-nonsense courtroom management, reviewed the extensive evidence files, while federal prosecutor Jennifer Walsh organized her presentation materials with military precision. This case involves systematic financial fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit multiple federal crimes over an extended period. Judge Morrison said, addressing the packed courtroom, the evidence suggests organized criminal enterprise targeting family members and romantic partners for financial exploitation. Walsh's opening presentation methodically outlined the scope of my parents' criminal behavior, using PowerPoint slides and financial documents to demonstrate how they'd operated their fraud scheme with sophisticated coordination and long-term planning. The defendants maintained detailed files on potential victims, monitored credit reports and career advancement, and systematically created false documentation to support fraudulent financial obligations. Walsh explained displaying evidence that made my parents appear more like organized crime figures than misguided family members. The prosecution's case included testimony from Marcus Thompson, who presented timeline evidence showing 8 years of systematic financial manipulation, targeting 7 different victims. Each case followed identical patterns: identification of financially successful individuals, cultivation of artificial obligations through emotional manipulation, and creation of fraudulent documentation to support collection efforts. The mortgage fraud was simply the most ambitious element of a larger criminal enterprise, Thompson testified. The defendants had perfected their manipulation techniques through years of practice on smaller targets before attempting to secure a $500,000 mortgage through forged signatures and fabricated income documentation. My parents' defense attorney, a nervous-looking man named William Preston, attempted to portray their behavior as misguided family loyalty rather than criminal conspiracy. His strategy relied on emotional appeals about family obligations and cultural expectations of supporting struggling relatives. My clients genuinely believed they were helping their daughter achieve stability for her children, Preston argued. Their methods may have been inappropriate, but their intentions were loving and protective rather than criminal and exploitative. Judge Morrison interrupted Preston's emotional presentation with the question that demolished their entire defense strategy. Counselor, if the defendants genuinely believed Ms. Rodriguez had agreed to these financial obligations, why are there no legitimate signatures on any banking documents? Why would legitimate agreements require forged signatures and falsified income documentation? The courtroom fell silent as Preston struggled to answer without admitting his clients had committed fraud. The logical impossibility of legitimate agreements requiring forged documentation exposed the fundamental dishonesty underlying my parents' entire defense strategy. Your Honor, family financial arrangements often involve informal agreements that are formalized through subsequent documentation, Preston replied weakly. Subsequent documentation bearing forged signatures and fabricated financial information, Judge Morrison said dryly. Are you suggesting that informal family agreements typically require identity theft and bank fraud for implementation? Preston's face flushed red as he realized his defense strategy was crumbling under judicial scrutiny. The judge's direct questions had exposed the absurdity of claiming legitimate family agreements while simultaneously admitting to criminal fraud in their documentation. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, how do you explain the defendant's systematic targeting of multiple family members using identical manipulation tactics and fraudulent documentation methods over an 8-year period? Does your theory of misguided family loyalty account for organized criminal enterprise? The courtroom tension was palpable as my parents' carefully constructed facade of concerned family members dissolved under the weight of overwhelming evidence and judicial logic. Their defense attorneys' attempts to maintain sympathy for their position became increasingly desperate and unconvincing. Hannah suddenly stood up in the gallery, her voice trembling as she addressed the court without permission. Your Honor, I need to tell the truth about what really happened. Judge Morrison allowed Hannah to approach the bench after warning her about the legal implications of spontaneous testimony. Hannah's decision to cooperate with the prosecution in exchange for reduced charges had been negotiated weeks earlier, but her public confession in open court carried dramatic weight that courtroom observers would remember for years. My parents taught me to manipulate people from childhood. Hannah said, her voice barely audible but carrying clearly in the silent courtroom. They showed me how to identify successful family members and romantic partners, create fake emergencies, and use emotional manipulation to extract money from my lifestyle and their financial schemes. Her testimony detailed years of systematic training and manipulation techniques, from childhood lessons in emotional blackmail to sophisticated coordination of fraudulent documentation and social pressure campaigns designed to isolate and coerce victims into financial compliance. I knew the signatures were forged, I knew the financial documents were fake, and I participated willingly in deceiving and manipulating my own family members. Hannah continued, tears streaming down her face. Eliza never agreed to pay my mortgage. We planned to force her compliance through legal intimidation and social pressure. Judge Morrison ordered a brief recess to allow Hannah's spontaneous confession to be properly documented and incorporated into the official record. When court reconvened, my parents' attorney attempted to distance his clients from Hannah's testimony, claiming she was an unreliable witness seeking reduced punishment through false accusations. But the damage was irreversible. Hannah's public confession corroborated every element of the prosecution's case, while destroying any remaining sympathy for my parents' position. The federal charges would proceed with overwhelming evidence and victim testimony that painted them as sophisticated criminals rather than misunderstood family members. As I left the courthouse that afternoon, reporters surrounded me for comments about the dramatic courtroom developments. For the first time in months, I could speak publicly about my family's criminal behavior without compromising ongoing legal proceedings. Justice is being served, I said simply. The truth about systematic financial exploitation and family manipulation has finally been exposed through proper legal channels. The courtroom confrontation had vindicated my decision to resist my family's financial demands and pursue criminal prosecution despite enormous social pressure and emotional manipulation. Judge Morrison's logical questions had demolished their defense strategy, while Hannah's confession had provided definitive proof of organized criminal conspiracy, spanning nearly a decade. 6 weeks after the federal trial concluded sentencing, day arrived with the weight of finality that would reshape our family forever. The same federal courthouse that had witnessed Hannah's dramatic confession now prepared to deliver justice for years of systematic financial exploitation and criminal conspiracy that had destroyed trust and relationships across 3 generations. Judge Morrison entered the courtroom with the federal sentencing guidelines in hand, having reviewed extensive victim impact statements, psychological evaluations, and pre-sentence investigation reports that painted a comprehensive picture of my parents' criminal enterprise and its devastating effects on multiple family members. My father, wearing the same gray suit he'd worn to my college graduation, stood before the bench, looking older and frailer than I'd ever seen him. The man who'd taught me values of honesty and integrity now faced federal prison for betraying those principles in pursuit of financial gain through manipulation and fraud. Mr. Rodriguez, you have pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit bank fraud, identity theft, wire fraud, and money laundering. Judge Morrison said, her voice carrying the authority of federal justice. The evidence shows systematic criminal behavior over 8 years targeting family members who trusted and loved you. The federal sentencing guidelines recommended 4 to 6 years imprisonment, but Judge Morrison had discretion to consider mitigating factors, including my parents' age, health conditions, and willingness to cooperate in identifying other victims and recovering stolen funds. The psychological evaluation indicates you demonstrate genuine remorse for your actions, an understanding of the harm you caused to family relationships. She continued, However, the sophisticated nature of your criminal enterprise and the duration of your fraudulent activities require significant consequences. Judge Morrison sentenced my father to 3 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years supervised probation, during which he would be required to make full restitution to all identified victims and participate in financial responsibility counseling programs. My mother's sentencing reflected her secondary role in the conspiracy, but acknowledged her active participation in emotional manipulation and document falsification. She received 18 months imprisonment, followed by 4 years supervised probation with similar restitution and counseling requirements. Mrs. Rodriguez, your manipulation of family emotional bonds to facilitate financial crimes represents a particularly cruel aspect of this criminal enterprise, Judge Morrison explained. You weaponize love and trust as tools for theft and exploitation. Hannah's sentencing had occurred separately the previous week, where her cooperation with federal prosecutors and genuine remorse had earned her probation instead of imprisonment. She received 5 years supervised probation, during which she was required to maintain employment, participate in financial counseling, attend parenting classes, and make graduated restitution payments to family members. The restitution orders totaled over $400,000 in stolen funds, forged loan obligations, and civil damages that would be paid through structured payment plans supervised by federal probation officers. My parents would surrender their house retirement accounts and personal assets to begin immediate restitution payments. The court recognizes that financial restitution cannot repair the emotional damage and destroyed family relationships resulting from your criminal behavior, Judge Morrison said during my parents' final sentencing remarks. Your actions represent betrayal of fundamental values that hold families and communities together. As my parents were led away to begin their prison sentences, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and relief. Justice had been served, but the cost included destruction of family relationships that had shaped my entire life until their betrayal forced me to choose between my financial security and their criminal demands. Hannah approached me in the courthouse hallway afterward, her expression combining shame with tentative hope for eventual reconciliation. Her transformation during the legal proceedings had been remarkable, as federal prosecution and mandatory counseling had forced her to confront the manipulation tactics she'd learned from childhood and used throughout her adult relationships. Eliza, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know I understand what I did was wrong. She said, her voice steady but humble. The counseling has helped me realize I was taught to see successful people as resources to be exploited, rather than individuals deserving respect and autonomy. Her acknowledgement of responsibility felt genuine, supported by months of consistent behavior change and cooperation with authorities, rather than continued manipulation and excuse-making that had characterized her previous attempts at reconciliation. I've started working full-time at a financial services company where I'm learning legitimate ways to manage money and build stability for my children, Hannah continued. It's harder than manipulating family members, but it's honest work that I can be proud of. The conversation was awkward but represented the first authentic communication we'd shared in years. Hannah's participation in criminal conspiracy had destroyed my trust, but her cooperation with justice and genuine efforts toward personal change suggested possibility for eventual healing, though full reconciliation would require years of consistent, honest behavior. Extended family members had responded to the criminal convictions with mixture of relief, anger, and embarrassment about being manipulated for so many years. The restitution orders would provide financial recovery, but the emotional scars from systematic exploitation and betrayal would take much longer to heal. Cousin Sarah had emerged as an unofficial family leader during the crisis, organizing support for grandmother Rose and helping other victims navigate the complex legal and financial recovery processes. Her courage in exposing the broader fraud had strengthened our case while demonstrating the family loyalty and integrity my parents had abandoned. It feels strange that prosecuting Uncle Richard and Aunt Martha was necessary to protect our family from them, Sarah said during a gathering of fraud victims at her house the week after sentencing. But their criminal behavior left us no choice except legal action or continued victimization. The family dynamics were slowly stabilizing around new leadership that prioritized honesty, accountability, and genuine mutual support rather than the manipulation and exploitation that had characterized my parents' approach to family relationships. As I drove home from the courthouse that final day, I passed the house where I'd grown up, learning values my parents had systematically betrayed in pursuit of financial gain. The building looked smaller and shabbier than I remembered, stripped of the warm memories that had been poisoned by discovering the calculated manipulation underlying our family interactions. But I also felt hope for rebuilding authentic relationships with family members who demonstrated genuine care and integrity throughout the crisis. The legal battle had revealed who could be trusted and who prioritized honesty over convenience, providing foundation for healthier family dynamics moving forward. 18 months after that shocking family dinner that began this nightmare, I stood in the kitchen of my new home, a charming 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, 30 minutes from my childhood memories, but light years away from the manipulation and betrayal that had nearly destroyed my faith in family bonds. The federal court's final restitution order had awarded me $550,000 in damages, covering all fraudulent debts, legal expenses, credit restoration costs, and compensation for the emotional distress and professional damage my family's criminal enterprise had inflicted. The money represented not just financial recovery, but legal vindication of my decision to resist their demands, despite enormous pressure. My credit had been completely restored through federal intervention, with all fraudulent accounts removed, and my credit score returning to excellent status that reflected my actual financial responsibility, rather than my parents' criminal theft. Morrison Financial Group had not only reinstated my full professional responsibilities, but promoted me to portfolio director in recognition of my integrity throughout the crisis. The promotion came with substantial salary increase and management responsibilities that demonstrated my colleagues' restored confidence in my professional judgment and ethical standards. My supervisor, Jennifer Stevens, had personally apologized for the company's initial suspicion, explaining that my principled resistance to family pressure had ultimately impressed senior management. Your willingness to pursue legal action against family members rather than compromise your integrity shows exactly the kind of character we want in leadership positions, Jennifer had said during my promotion announcement. The clients respect your commitment to honesty and ethical behavior. But the most meaningful healing had come through new relationships built on authentic trust, rather than blood obligations and inherited expectations. David and I had rekindled our romance after he'd learned the full scope of my parents' manipulation campaign and realized how skillfully they'd exploited his caring nature against our relationship. I should have trusted my experience with you rather than believing manufactured evidence from people I barely knew, David had said during our reconciliation dinner 6 months earlier. Your integrity and stability were obvious from our 2 years together, but they made me question my own perceptions. Our relationship had emerged stronger through the crisis, built on deeper understanding of how manipulation tactics could affect even strong bonds and renewed commitment to direct communication rather than allowing outside influences to create doubt or distance between us. Hannah's transformation had been the most surprising development in our family's recovery process. Her federal probation requirements included financial counseling, parenting classes, and regular employment that had forced her to develop legitimate life skills rather than relying on manipulation and exploitation of others' success. Learning to support myself and my children through honest work has been harder but more satisfying than anything I've ever done. Hannah had written in a letter she'd sent me 3 months earlier. I understand now that asking for help is different from demanding support, and that family relationships should be based on mutual respect rather than financial obligations. Her letter included detailed apologies for specific instances of manipulation and betrayal, demonstrating genuine understanding of how her behavior had affected our family rather than generic expressions of regret designed to restore relationships without acknowledging responsibility. The children were thriving in their new circumstances with Hannah's honest employment, providing stable if modest housing, and Emma's anxiety symptoms completely resolved once the manufactured family crisis ended. They attended good schools and participated in activities funded by Hannah's legitimate income rather than stolen money from manipulated family members. Our extended family had slowly healed around new traditions that emphasized honesty and accountability, rather than the enablement and exploitation that had characterized gatherings during my parents' criminal enterprise. Cousin Sarah had organized monthly dinners where family members could maintain connections while ensuring transparent communication about financial matters. We learned that family loyalty means protecting each other from harm, including harm from other family members who've lost their way, Sarah had explained during our most recent gathering. Supporting Eliza's legal action was the most loving thing we could do for everyone involved. Grandmother Rose had been moved to a specialized memory care facility where her finances were managed by professional trustees who'd recovered most of the funds my parents had stolen from her estate. She retained enough cognitive function to understand that justice had been served, though the complexity of the legal proceedings remained beyond her comprehension. My parents' letters from federal prison had evolved from angry accusations to gradual acceptance of responsibility for their actions. The structured environment and mandatory counseling had apparently helped them understand how their manipulation tactics had destroyed family relationships while failing to provide genuine stability for Hannah and her children. We lost sight of the values we tried to teach you and became the kind of people we once warned you against trusting, my father had written in his most recent letter. Our love for Hannah was real, but we expressed it through enabling her worst impulses rather than helping her develop strength and independence. Their acknowledgement of responsibility felt genuine, though full reconciliation would require years of consistent changed behavior after their release from prison. The foundation for potential healing existed, but trust would need to be rebuilt through actions rather than words, given their sophisticated ability to manipulate emotions and perceptions. I'd used part of my legal settlement to establish the Family Financial Safety Foundation, a nonprofit organization that educated people about recognizing and responding to financial manipulation by family members. The foundation provided legal resources, counseling services, and support groups for victims of family financial abuse. Helping other people recognize manipulation tactics and protect themselves from exploitation has given meaning to my own difficult experience. I'd explained during the Foundation's inaugural fundraising dinner. Family financial abuse is more common than people realize because victims feel ashamed about prosecuting relatives, and communities often pressure them to forgive rather than seek justice. The Foundation's work had connected me with hundreds of people who'd experienced similar manipulation, by family members confirming that my parents' behavior represented a widespread problem rather than an isolated family dysfunction. Many victims had suffered for years before finding courage to seek legal protection from relatives who'd weaponized family obligations against their financial security. Professional speaking engagements about family financial abuse had become a significant part of my work, helping financial advisors, therapists, and legal professionals recognize signs of family manipulation and provide appropriate resources for victims who needed support in protecting themselves from exploitation. The most important lesson I learned is that real family supports your growth and independence rather than trying to control or exploit your success. I told audiences during recent presentations. Setting boundaries with manipulative family members isn't selfish. It's necessary for protecting yourself and creating space for healthy relationships to develop. Standing in my kitchen that morning, preparing breakfast while sunlight streamed through windows overlooking my garden, I reflected on how completely my life had been transformed through the crisis that had initially threatened to destroy everything I'd worked to achieve. The legal battle had vindicated my resistance to financial manipulation while exposing the sophisticated criminal enterprise my family had operated for years. But more importantly, it had taught me to recognize authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than inherited obligations and emotional manipulation. David joined me in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand and newspaper tucked under his arm, representing the stable partnership we'd built through honest communication and shared values rather than family pressure and social expectations. "Any interesting developments in the Foundation's work this week?" he asked, settling into our morning routine of reviewing the day ahead while enjoying breakfast together. 3 new support groups starting in different cities, and a law school has requested curriculum development for courses on family financial crimes. I replied, noting how naturally our conversation flowed around meaningful work rather than family drama or financial stress. The Foundation's growth had exceeded my expectations, demonstrating widespread need for education and support services, addressing family financial manipulation. Victim stories confirmed that my experience, while traumatic, had ultimately equipped me to help others navigate similar challenges with resources and legal protections I developed through my own battle. As we prepared to leave for work, I paused to appreciate the peaceful stability of a life built on authentic relationships and honest achievement rather than family obligations manipulated through guilt and emotional terrorism. The house felt truly mine in a way my childhood home never had, representing security earned through personal effort rather than inherited expectations. The drive to work took me past my sister's modest apartment complex, where Hannah was building legitimate stability for her children through honest employment and responsible financial management. Her transformation didn't erase the years of manipulation and betrayal, but it suggested that people could change when forced to confront the consequences of their actions and develop healthier coping strategies. At the office, my promotion had brought new challenges and responsibilities that utilized both my financial expertise and the crisis management skills I'd developed during the family legal battle. Colleagues respected my integrity and judgment, knowing I'd chosen professional ethics over family pressure when faced with difficult choices. "Your experience taught all of us about the importance of protecting client interests, even when personal relationships create conflicting pressures," Jennifer Stevens had said during my performance review. "That's exactly the kind of leadership we need in senior management positions." The afternoon brought news that 3 more family financial abuse cases had been successfully prosecuted using legal strategies our foundation had helped develop and promote. Each victory represented another family protected from systematic exploitation and manipulation by relatives who'd forgotten that love should nurture rather than control and exploit. As evening approached, I returned home to prepare for a dinner party with friends whose relationships had survived and strengthened through my family crisis. These were people who'd offered genuine support during difficult times rather than judgment or pressure to forgive and forget criminal behavior for the sake of family harmony. To friendship based on honesty and mutual respect. Sarah toasted during our gathering, raising her wine glass in celebration of relationships that had proven authentic through adversity. And to Eliza's courage in protecting all of us by refusing to enable manipulation and abuse. The evening's conversation flowed naturally between personal updates, professional achievements, and foundation work that was helping other families recognize and respond to financial manipulation before it reached the criminal level my parents had achieved. David's presence at my side represented the romantic partnership we'd rebuilt on stronger foundations after learning how manipulation could affect even loving relationships. His support during my legal battle had ultimately strengthened our bond while teaching us both to communicate directly rather than allowing outside influences to create doubt or misunderstanding. As guests departed and we cleaned up together, I reflected on the strange gratitude I felt for the crisis that had initially threatened to destroy my life, but ultimately led to deeper authenticity in every relationship and professional achievement built on genuine merit rather than family expectations. Do you ever regret pursuing legal action instead of just paying Hannah's mortgage to keep peace in the family? David asked a question that had become our periodic check-in about decisions that had shaped our future together. Never, I replied without hesitation. Paying her mortgage would have enabled their criminal behavior while teaching them that manipulation and fraud work when applied with sufficient pressure. Everyone benefited from learning that actions have consequences, even within families. The legal battle had taught me that protecting yourself from manipulation isn't selfish, but necessary for maintaining integrity and creating space for healthy relationships to develop. Real family members support your growth and independence, rather than trying to control or exploit your success for their own benefit. Before bed, I reviewed thank you letters from Foundation beneficiaries whose lives had been improved through education and support services we provided. Each story reminded me that my difficult experience had equipped me to help others navigate similar challenges with resources and legal protections I developed through my own battle. Your foundation helped me recognize that my brother's emergency requests were actually systematic financial abuse, one letter read. I've set boundaries and protected my savings while still maintaining a relationship based on respect rather than financial obligation. Another letter described how family financial abuse education had helped a young professional recognize manipulation early and seek legal protection before losing significant money or damaging credit through relatives' fraudulent activities. As I prepared for sleep in my own home built with money I'd earned through honest work and recovered through legal action against criminal family members, I felt profound gratitude for the strength I'd discovered during my most difficult period and the authentic relationships that had emerged from that crisis. The Foundation's work would continue helping families recognize and respond to financial manipulation, while my own life demonstrated that standing up to abuse ultimately benefits everyone involved by breaking destructive patterns and creating space for genuine healing and healthy relationships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation and control. My story had become a testament that protecting yourself from family financial abuse, regardless of social pressure to forgive and forget, ultimately serves everyone's best interests by establishing boundaries that allow authentic love to replace manipulation and fear. Have you ever faced pressure from family members to compromise your financial security for their benefit? How did you handle the situation, and what advice would you give others experiencing similar manipulation? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Thank you so much for taking this journey with me and allowing me to share how I overcame one of the most challenging periods of my life. If this story resonated with you or helped you recognize manipulation tactics in your own relationships, please like this video, subscribe for more content about family dynamics and financial protection, and share this story with friends or family members who might benefit from understanding these important issues. Remember that seeking help and setting boundaries with manipulative family members isn't selfish. It's necessary for protecting yourself and creating space for healthy relationships to grow. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never let anyone convince you that love requires sacrificing your security and well-being.